I am excited to be bringing the final message from the book of Ruth. A story, the second song, navigating a broken world on our way home, and that is part of the story we're looking at this morning. And of course, it is my desire that the name of Jesus and his name alone would be proclaimed this morning, and that our hearts would be drawn to him, that you in your situations, whatever it is, would be drawn to Jesus. Even though we are looking at a story that happened many years before him, but a story that points to Jesus. And this morning we're going to be looking again at the providence of our God. Good morning and welcome to each one who is here. I'm happy to see Delphine and Keith here again. I don't know how long they're going to be around. Delphine is a sister to Steph and Julianne, and they live in Haiti and are serving the kingdom there, serving God there. And when I saw them, I thought, oh boy, you see, in some ways, those of us living, and maybe I say this sort of ashamedly, but we can't identify with some of the hard things that the Christians face in places of persecution and violence. And we act as though life is certain here, and it's not. You are not guaranteed to see this evening. And so let's live today in such a way. But maybe when they probably have more reminders of that where they live. And so I trust that this morning will be encouraging for you, but also for each one of us. And for those of you joining online, welcome. I'm glad that you are here. I greet you all this morning in the name of Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who gave all for the redemption of you and me, and for anyone who would come to him. Ruth, this morning from chapter 4, a story of redemption. We are concluding a series that I entitled Faithful to a Providential God. God is in control. I think the youth were talking about that this morning in Sunday school, and this is going to be a continuation for you throughout this book. It is fair to wonder, as you read the story of Ruth, it is fair to wonder sometimes, where is God? What are you doing? Why is this happening? And I hope that you will this morning be encouraged to see that he was in control then and that he is in control today. That he is sovereign, that he is providential always, and that nothing has ever happened outside of his control. It causes us to ask the question, but why would he allow certain things to happen? And those are fair questions, but God's always seeing a picture much larger than the one that you and I see. And so no matter what happens, this story recorded in the book of Ruth has so many twists and turns. If it was a movie, this morning we would be getting to the climax of the movie. We would be sitting on the edge of our seat waiting to see what's going to happen. Everyone would be quiet in the room. In Ruth chapter 1, I don't know how many of you heard the previous three messages. In Ruth 1, Elimelech, Naomi, and their sons Mahlon and Chilion leave the land of promise. In fact, this is against God's will. Finally, they have entered Canaan. They are in the land of promise. But there is a famine there, and they hear that there is food in Moab. They leave the land of promise, and Bethlehem, the house of bread, because of the famine, and they go to the idolatrous land of Moab. Mahlon and Chilion marry Moabite women there, and in a tragic turn of events, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion all die. I mean, there's the beginning of the movie, right? I mean, there's the tragedy, and you wonder how it's going to unfold. It is a terrible situation. Naomi is left with her two Moabite daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, and when they hear that God has provided bread again in Bethlehem, Naomi decides to return. And you will remember that when she arrives, she says to the people, the ladies come out and they say, "Is this Naomi returned?" And she says, "Don't call me Naomi any longer, but call me Mara, because my life is empty and bitter. I am filled with bitterness. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." In Ruth chapter 2, Ruth goes into the field to pick grain, and Boaz notices her. He blesses her because he heard of the kindness that she showed to Naomi, and he says to her, Boaz says to Ruth, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." And you have to remember that the Moabites were a hated people. They were, the Jews they despised the Moabites. But Boaz blesses Ruth, the Moabitess, and provides enough grain to her and Naomi to last a very long time. And in chapter 3, we have the very shady scene that took place on the threshing room floor. And I am so glad to be on this side of that message. It is a sketchy scene, you know it, where Ruth goes to the threshing room, the threshing floor at night where Boaz is, and basically she proposes to him and asks him to take her as his wife. Ruth and Naomi come to Bethlehem, you remember, in need of two things. They need food and family. Boaz has provided food. He's been sending grain home to them. The food has been provided. They are still in need of family. Excuse me. They are in need of a provider. To be a widow without a provider in this culture is a life destined to perpetual poverty. It is a hard life. It is a life that is lonely. In this chapter 3, we see Boaz, a man of noble character. He had every opportunity that night when Ruth came to him and said, I want you to provide. I want you to marry me. I want you to take me as your wife. She was a Moabitess. Any man in this time would have taken advantage of her. But Boaz does not. He chooses faithfulness in the hour of temptation. He chooses strength and honor, and he blesses Ruth for her kindness that he has shown him, rather than scorning her as the foreigner. And the author in this book intentionally refers to her as the Moabitess, as the foreigner. These are low terms. Ruth understood her position. And he says, "Fine, I will marry you. But there is one kinsman redeemer." You've heard that term a few times. Someone in our family that is closer than I am. And so tomorrow we will go check with that man if he would marry you. And can you imagine the letdown that Ruth was experiencing at that point? Boaz just said, I will marry you, but we're going to check first if this man that Ruth has not yet met, this no-name man, his name isn't recorded, if he wants to marry you, and if he chooses not to, then I will. And so there they have that, I'm guessing, sleepless night of looking at the stars and wondering what the next day would hold. And so here we are in the next morning, chapter 4. And if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to chapter 4 of the book of Ruth, where Boaz goes to the relative to ask him if he will marry Ruth. Chapter 4 of Ruth. And I will say right off here that some of my points are borrowed from David Platt. A kinsman redeemer, by the way. Kinsman, a relative of kin, next of kin. So a kinsman would be the nearest adult male relative would be the kinsman redeemer. The redeemer is, of course, purchasing back, bringing back. A redeemer is someone who takes something back, redeeming it. And so a kinsman redeemer. Verse 1. And Daryl, just like I have with the other three messages, basically going to go through verse by verse and explaining and teaching, and making some parallels for us. So I don't know if that affects how you stream that. Meanwhile, verse 1, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. And Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend. Sit down." And so he went over and sat down. Now, a couple things. You talk about the providence of God. It just so happened that this man was coming through the town gate when Boaz was there. Now, the town gate is where, however, a man has no one to redeem it for him, but he himself prospers and acquires sufficient means to redeem it. He is to determine the value for the years since he sold it and refund the balance to the man to whom he sold it. He can go back to his own property. All right, so just basic how we're going to buy and sell land in the Hebrew times. Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 to 10. Now, these are, we often don't read from these Old Testament books. This is just to give us understanding of what is happening in the book of Ruth. Verses 5 to 10, and God's plan here is to provide for widows, that widows in the Hebrew time were provided for. And so verse 5, if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside of the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out of Israel. This is God's instruction to the Hebrew people that widows are provided for. When a brother dies, when a husband dies, his brother will marry the widow and make provision. And when she has a son, he will carry on the name. However, verse 7, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she shall go to the elders at the town gate and say, "My husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me." Then the elders of the town shall summon him and talk to him. If he persists in saying, "I don't want to marry her," his brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, and spit in his face, and say, "This is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line." That man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. Interesting. So that's what's taking place right here, just to understand. Now, Boaz, this speaks to his noble character. He understood what God was expecting, and I think he wanted to marry Ruth. There was Naomi, who was his next of kin. Ruth was a Moabitess. Boaz was old. Ruth was young. Naomi was old. But he understood that the law said Ruth was not to be his, that there was someone else that should look after her. Let's read on. What happens? So Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. He is clearly a man of standing. He was referred to that in chapter 2, Boaz, a man of standing. He clearly had respect, and they often bless him with blessings to Yahweh. And so he also was clearly a follower of Yahweh. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." And they did so. And he said to the guardian redeemer, that man, we don't know his name, Mr. So-and-so. And by the way, it is very likely that Naomi and Ruth are both present watching. That would be normal. Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here. I mean, what is Boaz doing? Naomi and Ruth must have been dumbfounded at this proposition. They wanted Boaz to take them in. And here he is saying, there is this lot of land that she owns. And I thought I should bring it to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and then I am next in line. This is a no-brainer for Mr. So-and-so. I mean, he's being offered this land. Naomi comes with it. She's old. She'll require a little bit of attention, but then she passes away. He has the wealth, and he responds just like most of us would. I will do it. I will redeem it, he said. Imagine what Naomi and Ruth are thinking. Boaz, if this is that movie we're talking about, Mr. So-and-so and Ruth ride off in the sunset, and we go, what on earth was that? Where is God? Boaz, what are you doing? Let's go on. And Boaz says, there's one other thing. I forgot. On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you remember Ruth, the Moabite? He calls her that. You will also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the dead with his property. Ruth, remember her. She's a Moabite. Remember the Moabites? They're the ones that, you know what they did to our guys there years ago. 24,000 of them fell in one day to God's judgment, remember? And this man is dumbfounded. He says, the guardian redeemer says, then I can't redeem it because it might endanger my own estate. I'm not getting involved in this. Ruth, the Moabitess, you redeem it yourself. I can't do it. You see, with Ruth, who is of childbearing age, would mean that Mr. No-Name would need to provide an heir, if possible, to this lot of land. It would not go to Mr. No-Name. It would go to Ruth's son. Suddenly, there is not so much in it for this man. And he says, I don't want that. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Verses 7 through 12. And so, And listen to this. Now, in earlier times in Israel, and there's no spitting in the face going on here, but listen to this. In earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was a method of legalizing transactions in Israel. And so the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself." And he removed his sandal and gave it to him. And Boaz holds that sandal. And he says to the people, so your 10 elders are gathered and the people are crowded around. Can you imagine what Naomi and Ruth must be feeling right now? I mean, they just went from being widowed, and remember, that was probably the most difficult life a person could have, in a widow without a clan. And they were being redeemed. They were being taken from a destitute place to being redeemed. And Boaz announces to the elders and all the people. And these are the last words that Boaz speaks in the book of Ruth. But listen to this passionate speech. "Today, you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, of Kilion and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife." If this was the movie, we'd be like, oh, that's how it's supposed to end, right? Let's just back up here a little bit. Chapter 1, verse 22, Ruth the Moabitess. Chapter 2, verse 10, Ruth the foreigner. Chapter 2, verse 13, Ruth the slave. Chapter 3, verse 9, Ruth the servant. Chapter 4, verse 10, Ruth the wife. I've acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. You are witnesses. Then the elders and all the people at the gate, and just listen to what these witnesses say. Listen to this prayer of blessing, and they say, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make this woman who is coming into your home like Rachel or Leah." Do you understand the power of this? She is a foreigner that the Hebrews hated. Blessing her to be like Rachel and Leah. Fertility. Rachel and Leah together had 12 sons. They are saying, this lady coming into your home, may she be like Rachel or Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah. We don't really, there's a little bit of ambiguity about what Ephrathah is, but most scholars conclude it means Bethlehem. May you have standing in Bethlehem. Remember, that's where they are. And be famous in Bethlehem. Oh, they have no idea that a few thousand years later, we're going to be talking about Boaz and lifting him up because of the choices that he made and his faithfulness. May you be famous in Bethlehem through the offspring the Lord gives you by this woman. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Wow, okay, well that gets a little confusing maybe there. We're not going to get into Tamar and Judah, but you can read it, I think, in Genesis 38. Ephrathah, by the way, means fruitful. They are saying, may this relationship be fruitful. What a blessing. Let's go on. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. This is crazy. In Ruth chapter 2, there is an entire chapter devoted to one day. There in chapter 3, an entire chapter is devoted to a couple hours, one night at the threshing floor. And in verse 13, Boaz and Ruth get married and have a baby. And the Lord enabled her. 2 times in this book, God is brought to the forefront, right here. The other one is in chapter 1, verse 6. When Naomi, it says, when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people in providing food for them. 2 times. Remember, they had 2 needs. They needed food. God provided it. They needed family. God provided it. And both times, that recognition is part of the text. Their needs were met. Dear friends, God alone can meet your needs. If you are looking anywhere else to have your needs met, you will come up empty. Whatever you are chasing, if you think that a larger bank account will satisfy, you will be left wanting. If you think a relationship will meet your needs, you will be left empty. If God alone can meet needs, and he alone is a redeemer, taking things that are broken and redeeming, reclaiming them. He heals the brokenhearted. He gives life. He alone can meet your deepest needs, and he alone satisfies the deepest desires of your hearts. And let's go on, verses 14 and 15. Here's a birthday party going on, and I'm not sure where Ruth is, but you know how it goes. There's a baby in the house, and Grandma is holding the baby. And the ladies come, and you got to listen to this. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law," listen to this, "for your daughter-in-law, Ruth, is better to you than 7 sons." 7, the number of completion, that perfect number. This is better, they say, than 7 sons would be to you. May he become famous. Little do they know. They have no idea. And this is the only time, by the way, these pronouns are pointing to the guardian redeemer, and the only time in the Old Testament that a guardian redeemer, they are actually referring to the baby here as being the one who's going to redeem. That's how it is written. And it's the only time in the Old Testament that a baby is referenced as the guardian redeemer of a family. But they're saying, Naomi, this child is going to save you. This child is going to provide for you. And Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. And the women living there said, "Naomi has a son." Wow. And they named the son Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Ruth, the Moabitess, she is the great-grandmother to the greatest king that Israel ever had. Ruth, the foreigner who faithfully served. Little did she know, her life was hard. She was the great-grandma to David, king of Israel. And you know that David is in line of the greatest king that ever lived. This Moabitess just became great-grandma to King David. And then the author closes this book by naming the 10 generations that lead to the birth of King David, the genealogy of David. This, then, is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. 10. Symbolism. At the beginning of this, at the beginning of the book, there were 10 years. 10 years of widowhood. And we realize now that this story of Ruth is about so much more than one small chapter of God's in the Bible. That this story of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz is part of a much greater story, a story that has been written now for thousands of years, God's story of redemption, and you and I are a part of it. Have you entered that story? Have you entered God's story of redemption? He is as much in control today as he was in the time of Ruth. Let's just close with looking at a few of the parallels. First of all, Boaz in redemptive history. Again, to redeeming is to gain or regain possession of something, an exchange for payment, to buy, to get, to win back. In order to redeem, one must have the right. Boaz had the right to redeem Naomi and Ruth. He was in line, in the family line. One must have the resources to redeem. Boaz had the resources to purchase the land, and he had the resources to provide. One must have the resolve, and he certainly did. When he remained faithful, and he resolved to be faithful to God by going to Mr. So-and-so first and said, you are next in line. And he did the whole process. He had the right, he had the resources, he had the resolve. Obed in the history of, redemptive history. Think of the difference from the beginning of the book of Ruth to the end. Here we are in the end. Naomi is no longer empty. You see, in God's redemption, he brings people from death to life. The beginning of Ruth, there is death. 3 men in the family die, and the family name does not go on. In the end of the story, there is new life. There is a child who's going to provide, who's going to redeem. God brings his people from curse to blessing. Think of the curse that Ruth lived under. And she would become this tremendous blessing in God's story. Ruth, the curse of being a Moabite. You think of the person on the lowest rung of the social ladder today. That's where Ruth was. And God used that to bless. God brings people from bitterness to happiness. Think about Naomi coming back to Bethlehem, and the ladies greet her, and she says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because my life is bitter. It is hard. I went away full, and I am coming back empty. I have nothing. Call me Mara. Now Naomi can say, call me joy. My life is full. She didn't say that. Call me full. And God brings people from bitterness to happiness. He brings people from emptiness to fullness. And I just gave that illustration as well. And finally, from despair to hope. Again, at the beginning of the book, Naomi has every right to despair. She is in a hard place. At the end, she is holding this child. She is holding a child that gives hope. There is a hope. Now, I am here to remind you this morning that verse 22 is not the end of the story. I'm quickly going to turn to Matthew chapter 1, verses 5 to 17. I'm not going to read them all. Relax. Matthew chapter 1. Those 10 generations at the end of the book of Ruth point to David. This is the beginning of the New Testament. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. And that's where the book of Ruth stops. Then it goes on. And David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Uriah's wife. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, and so on, and so on, and so on, all the way down to the end of verse 16. 15. Eliud, the father of Eleazar. Eleazar, the father of Matthan. Matthan, the father of Jacob. Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. If that's not exciting for us, I don't know what is. In the book of Ruth, the Moabitess, the foreigner, the slave, God was already pointing to a Redeemer that will purchase you and me. This story of Ruth is pointing to a king much greater than King David. And this story is part of a much greater story. God, in all of his sovereignty, took on the robe of humanity to become like us, to become akin to us, we might say. He became akin. He became a kinsman redeemer to us. That's what he did. He identifies with us. He became like us. Does he have the right to redeem? He is God. He absolutely has the right. Does he have the resources to redeem? The God of the universe, creator of all life, in control of all things, has a sacrificial lamb in his Son. He has the resources to redeem you and me. And does he have the resolve? 2,000 years ago, he sent his Son. This is not just a story of the past. This is the story of today, and you and I are invited. There is nothing about us that God is attracted to. He does not look down and see our good works and is drawn to that. He is not attracted to us. If we think so, we have a warped view of ourselves. You see, we are sinners. We have turned our back on God. We have mocked his name. We have scorned him. If you think that somehow God is drawn to us because of our position, our race, our wealth, you have a warped view of who you are. We are sinners. We have scorned him, but he chases us. He pursues us. And this is the story of Ruth. Boaz was attracted to her. God is not attracted to us, but he loves us and pursues us. He has seen our need and he pursues us. Hallelujah for that. God's providence. He is in control. Even we might even say, but we might even say, well, I have done some terrible things. We all have. If you cannot say that, you have a twisted view of yourself. You have not grasped the lostness in which you are living. Every one of us has done terrible things. But mark my words that your sin does not need to determine your destiny. What you have done does not need to determine where you are headed. God and Ruth and Boaz is working in your life. Do you know that? It's the same God. He is alive. This is not just some story. This is not just the past. This is God's story. He created the world in which we live. God has not abandoned us. We tend to get, perhaps we focus sometimes on sin and on the agendas of this world, and we're focusing on the wrong thing, friends. God providing for you. If your goal is a fat bank account, that's not what he's committed to, because that is the system of this world. If your goal is popularity, he's not necessarily going to provide that, because that is of this world. God is committed to sovereignly providing for his people. We can trust him in the worst of times because he is committed to radically pursuing all people, not just the people of Glen Allen or this church, not just Mennonites. He is radically pursuing all people. The story of Ruth is one of setback after setback after setback. It starts with the death of these people, and then the hard times. There's these, and if we had lived there and we focus on the setbacks only, we would question God's presence. And so even in our worst times, God is working for our good. He is. The sin, I might point at the difficult things, and I can't answer why some things are allowed. But I do know that we live in a broken place. Something that is not broken does not need redeeming. Even in our worst times, God is working for our good. Who had a son named Boaz? I think it's Boaz. Rahab, the prostitute, had a son named Boaz who chose faithfulness. A man of noble character. Man. Solomon's mom. Oh, then there was Ruth, the Moabite. And the fourth one is Solomon's mom, Uriah's wife, adulteress. 4 ladies mentioned. Do they belong there? Absolutely, because God's mission is redeeming people. And if you are broken, you need a redeemer. I trust that many of you have already entered that redemption, and I trust that many more of you will. God bless you as you continue following him. Trust him. He is trustworthy. He's in control. And because he is providential and sovereign, we can place all of our cares, our worries, our past, our sin in his hands, because he is a redeemer. God bless you as you continue to follow him.